In this video, we're going to be breaking down the most powerful solo carry character that is a completely balanced character, by the way, with her skill set being entirely based on gunplay. All joking aside, we're actually breaking down RAZE, who's your favorite demolition expert. Now let's run through how to get the most value out of RAZE in each and every game you play, and give you tips and tricks on every ability and general mistakes so that you get the most impact. Speaking of impact, smashing that subscribe button and letting us know in the comments down below is the greatest way to have impact over what videos we make here on this channel. So definitely comment away, kick off your shoes, relax, and let's get started. RAZE is a space plus opportunity creator. She can heavily punish enemies for pushing in as a joint team with paint shells. She has her Boombot for information plus dueling capabilities, and her blast packs are not only good for AoE, but mobility as well. Now talking about paint shells, there are typically two schools of thought when using them. One is to either use them early when enemies are more likely to be bunched up, or sandbag them for later on when you see an explicit reason to use them. Now, there are many starting rollouts that you can use paint shells on, but they tend to learn less and less as players get better, and they don't push and play in default for a substantial amount of time. Now, while you no longer can just throw one grenade and get 3 kills anymore, a general effective way to use paint shells is to actually block off an angle or split up a team. Remember, at its core, paint shells is an area denial ability who punishes enemies who don't respect its lethality. Similar to how like a Brimstone's Molly would, it removes people from an area, but of course paint shells is probably the most scary of these because it does tons of burst damage. However, it doesn't last as long as something like Molly does. Now, because of the lethality of paint shells, as enemies push onto a site, you could split them with a short bounce paint shells, and you collapse on the players that push the point as the others retreated. Essentially, you split them up because they can't run in single file line, because the paint shells forces the people that are already committed to push further in, and the people who are not quite committed to back all the way up. Now, another effective way to use your paint shells is just use it like a regular AoE. Just force enemies out of corners and wait for them to swing. Pretty simple, right? And unlike a lot of other forms of AoE, because of the burst damage of paint shells, when you throw it into a corner that an enemy's hiding, they're not going to be slow peeking out of that angle where they're going to try to outtrade you. They're going to be whipping out their knife, and they're going to be running the heck away, and you can kill them as they're running away. Just make sure that you put your crosshair not quite along the wall. Give yourself a little bit of room so that you can hit the flick shot for an enemy that is like running and jumping away. Now, generally, because you get another paint shells after every 2 kills, if you are sandbagging the shells, you usually want to try to find a use for it before you get that second kill if you already picked up a first kill, because then you can essentially chain them one after the other, paint shell into paint shell, which is incredibly powerful. I'm sure that some of you remember in the beta days, back before paint shells got nerfed and we had 2, those were the good old times. Now, honestly, the best solution between the debate about whether or not you should sandbag it for a perfect scenario or whether or not you should use it aggressively is usually a mix-up strategy. The aggressive strategy can get a ton of value, but it doesn't always work if enemies are expecting it. So as long as you mix it up with reactionary plus aggressive playstyles, you will get a lot more value out of paint shells. Now, RAZE's most powerful ability, in my personal opinion, Blast Pack, is being used consistently incorrectly. The best use of Blast Pack is honestly for its mobility. You'd think that Jet has the best mobility in the game, but RAZE comes pretty close. Blast Pack can help you survive ults like Orbital Strike, AoE like Molly, or just even general enemy fire. If you throw it out into the open, you can wide jiggle peek an enemy and set up trades and then do a tailwind impression where it blasts you back behind natural cover. There are so many different uses for Blast Pack, and the fact that not only does it provide so much mobility, but it's also extremely versatile, and the fact that it's an AoE ability as well means that it's just one of the best abilities in RAZE's kit altogether. Now, the next ability we have to talk about is Boombot, which is so powerful, but people are also consistently using it incorrectly. You do not want to be throwing it in 1v5. Now, there are going to be some examples where you don't know where enemies are routing to, and you could use it for information, sure, but if you're trying to actually get value for a play in the moment, you don't want to be just throwing it against 5 enemies, because that means there's 5 sets of guns that could potentially shoot it. If your goal is to try to follow up with your Boombot and secure kills with the Boombot, the trick is to overload the enemy. This means Boombot becomes exponentially better the less enemies you're using it against and the less enemies that are still on the field to shoot it. Imagine a 1v1 scenario. You having a Boombot versus another enemy in a 1v1 scenario is one of the most powerful things that RAZE can do, and it's such a lopsided scenario because enemies have to respect the Boombot, but they also have to respect you as well. So in that way, you almost turn a 1v1 into like a 1.5v1, which is even better. Now, an extremely powerful aspect of Boombot that doesn't get used a lot is, let's say an enemy threw a smoke or your team threw a smoke, you can send your Boombot through the smoke, and then the second it tags onto someone, all you do is look in the direction that it's going, and then you just shoot the enemy through the smoke. You basically just use the information side to set up an unfair engagement through the smoke. Now, this is going to be even better if you have a Phantom and not a Vandal, because if you have a Vandal, enemies are going to be able to easily see your fire through the smoke. So if you have a Phantom or even a Spectre or a Ghost, those are going to be far better because enemies are not going to be able to identify where you're shooting from, because you definitely don't want to get counter-traded. Maybe it's not by the guy that you're shooting at, but it could be by a guy nearby. Definitely better with silenced weapons for sure. And before we move on to our ultimate, remember that, of course, if you jump up, you can throw your Boombot on top of any surfaces like sage wall, boxes, or anything like that, which can have its uses. I'm going to explain a little bit more about that later. Now, before we get on to the biggest tips, tricks, and mistakes on RAZE, we got to talk about her ultimate, Showstopper. Well, if used correctly, RAZE's ultimate is probably the most likely ultimate to secure a kill a giant percent of the time. I mean, it's comically easy to get a kill with her ultimate. Now, there are two weaknesses to her ultimate, though, that it might be preventing you from getting value. One is the timing aspect, where there is a certain time frame after you activate your ultimate before you have to use it, or else it goes away. And two is the fact that when you activate it, RAZE just like yells like a psychopath, and everyone knows, hey, let's run the freak away. Now, in a second, I'm going to tell you some tips to make sure that you always get a kill with her ultimate, or even more. But on top of that, one of the most powerful ways to punish enemies is to use her blast pack to circumvent some type of delay, like a Sage Slow or a Sage Wall or anything like that, or even like a Molly from Brimstone. You use your blast pack to fly over these types of things, and then you secure a kill with the rocket in air, because not only is rocket more effective when you're flying high, because you could angle it downward, you get to basically precede expectations, because the expectation is, hey, no one's gonna push through my ice, hey, no one's gonna push through my Sage Wall. But if you use your blast pack plus your ultimate, you can go around that and you can kill a really valuable target in someone like Sage or Brimstone, which are some of the most powerful and impactful characters on the enemy team. In fact, in general, one of the best things about RAZE is that she is one of the strongest Sage counters in the game. Blast Pack can break walls or let him go over it. Bot can go over the wall. Rocket Launcher can easily help punish Sage. There's a lot to love about RAZE and how he's really good against the Sage. And Sage being the best character in the game, RAZE being a viable counter is actually legitimately powerful. Now let's go over the top 5 mistakes on RAZE. The first big mistake: blast packing your allies. I know that this one's not always avoidable, okay? If you are literally getting Hammer of Dawn from the sky, sometimes you just gotta get that extra burst of mobility and run away. But for the majority of scenarios, try not to blow off your allies' armor when just trying to do something cool, okay? You need to be trying to think a little bit about your allies, because once people start getting pissed at you, they're not gonna wanna work with you. And then on top of that, when you're poor and they got money, they're not gonna buy you. It's just a mess, okay? So you don't wanna tilt your team into oblivion, and you actually put yourself at a legitimate disadvantage when you do team damage. So do yourself a favor, be a little bit more cognizant about your allies and how your abilities affect them. Now, the second big mistake that happens a lot on RAZE is blowing your load. Your ability load, that is. You don't need to throw in your Boombot, blast pack it, and then throw paint shells the second you hear a sound. A big problem that comes up with RAZE is a problem that plagues players from every type of game with abilities. Whether it's Overwatch, League of Legends, or whatever, it's using abilities with intent. Now, what is intent? Well, intent is, what do you want your ability to do, and what do you want it to accomplish? It can't just be every time, hey, throw nades out, I get kills, yay. No, every ability should have a potential outcome that you should either try to accomplish or get a play off of. So, for example, throwing in a Boombot just to gather information right at the start of the round makes absolutely no sense, because then you identify where the enemy's at, but what's to stop them from rotating? Is that the result that you really wanted to trade your ability for? It's them to simply rotate, or them to simply shoot it? You basically traded a powerful ability for only a slight bit of information. Now, let's say that the round went on for a long time, you don't know where the enemy is, and then they have 35 seconds left. Identifying where the enemies are at that moment is worth exponentially more, because then they have to commit to a site because of the time crunch. So then you have to understand, abilities can accomplish this thing. Boombot can accomplish, I know where they are, but how valuable is that at what stage in the game? And that is the most important question that you need to ask yourself. How valuable is that information right now at the start of the round? not very valuable. And then it also depends on the round. Like in pistol rounds when people are rushing more, then it's more valuable, but later on when people have ARs, Vandals, and Ops, it's less valuable. So you basically need to take all this into consideration when using your abilities and use them with intent. Now the third big mistake that happens a lot, and I kind of touched up on it, but it's popping your ultimate without any ways to close the gap. You know, when everyone hears that ultimate, they will run away from RAZE. Then no one wants to die to RAZE's ultimate. Now, often it's the best case scenario to use your blast pack to set up a chase, because everyone will scatter like mice and you can close in the gap with your blast pack, and then also you can shoot down, which we talked about before. But typically what's often the best is knowing exactly how you're going to use your ultimate and who you're going to use it on before you activate it. Now, just activating it and then just trying to run in, sometimes that will work, but more often than not, enemies will just get the heck out of there, or they'll be setting up cross angles for you, or you'll potentially die. So keep that in mind. Have a game plan. It goes back to using your abilities with intent. The same thing is true for your ultimate. Now, a surprising tip that you might not think about is that OPing is actually surprisingly really strong on RAZE. You could set up blast packs to both set up an engage or a disengage from a sniper peek. You could basically throw a bomb down and jiggle peek an angle only for the blast pack to detonate exactly when you want to, so that you can get quickly behind natural cover. Another way that you can do it is actually launch yourself out with your blast pack, and the second you hit the ground, you snipe. You see this a lot with Jet when enemies like will glide down, touch the ground, then instantly snipe. You can do a very similar thing with RAZE. You don't even need a high ground when people do like ledge drop shotting. You can basically replicate that with RAZE, and it messes up the enemy's crosshair placement because you're going to be flying up and over and then down, land, shoot, and then you can instantly disengage with your second blast pack if you want to. Now, the last big tip that I have for you that you're not capitalizing on, and this is the most powerful thing that you could be doing on RAZE, and it's tilting the enemy. Okay, hear me out. This is what you do. You fly in, double blast pack, you rocket launcher an enemy, and then you type in the comment section, question mark, or outskilled, or your sage is throwing. You tell that to the enemy team. These are all pro level strats to tilt the enemy into oblivion. And as you know, mental toughness is part of the skill in Valorant. So every single time you single-handedly outplay their team with your paid shells or your Boombot or your ultimate, make sure that you talk trash about it and you tilt the enemy in chat. Anyways, all joking aside, for more tilting tips, smash that sub button and let us know what videos you want in the comments down below so that we can get started. Anyways, I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.